So what is the difference between stockinette and garter? As a beginner knitter, it can be really hard to keep these stitch patterns apart. So with knitting, there are mainly two stitches. There are others, but the main two that create knitting fabric are knit stitches and purl stitches. And that is how you get the difference between these two fabrics. This is stockinette on the left and garter on the right. They're both 2-row repeats. One is reversible and one is not, so garter is the same on both sides, whereas stockinette is kind of flat on one side and bumpy on the other. So if you look at the wrong side of stockinette, it actually looks a lot like garter, just a neater, smaller version of it. So stockinette is where on the first row, or the right side row, you work all knit stitches. And then when you work the wrong side row, you work all purl stitches. So it creates these column of V's, or column of knit stitches on one side, and columns of purl stitches on the other side. Now with garter, you're going to knit every stitch for every row. So on a right side row, you're going to knit it, and on a wrong side row, you're going to knit as well. So essentially when you're knitting, you're creating a V on the right side and a purl bump on the wrong side. And when you purl, you're creating a purl bump on that side and a V on the other side. So because I only worked knit stitches on one side, all you can see are V's. Because on the other side, you get the bumps. And on the wrong side, I only worked purl stitches. So what you see are all the purl stitches, and on the other side, you get the opposite of that. So you get V's. But when you work garter, because you're working knit stitches on every row, you can see that there are V's here, but they're kind of overshadowed by these purl bumps, right? Because you work one side and get V's, which you can see here, but then when you turn it around and work the other side, you're also knitting. And because on one side you get V's and on the other side you get bumps, you're always getting bumps on both sides, if that makes sense. It's almost like every other is a V and then a purl bump. So you get a much more textured stitch with garter than with stockinette. And there's lots of different purposes for each. Garter is great as an edging because it doesn't typically curl. It typically stays pretty much flat, kind of not quite stiff, whereas the problem with stockinette is that when you're first starting out with your cast on and when you're ending with your bind off, these edges can tend to curl. And now they naturally will curl. These don't really look like they're curling because I've steamed this, but you can still kind of see that this edge wants to curl. So a lot of times in beginner knitting patterns, you'll see lots of stockinette, but the edging will be out of garter because garter is very easy and it will prevent it from curling. But stockinette also gives that really beautiful texture. So let me know if you guys have any other questions about the difference between stockinette and garter as a beginner knitter. And I also have another video on the difference between a lot of the common stitch patterns. So that would include stockinette, garter, 1x1 ribbing, seed stitch, and moss stitch. And I also have another video on the difference between seed stitch and moss stitch. And finally, a third video on the difference between seed and moss stitch and ribbing. So if any of that interests you, you can find all the links below. And if you found this video helpful, please like it and subscribe for more videos.